This talk was given by Rafe Martin, guiding teacher of the Endless Path Zendo, a lay Buddhist community in Rochester, New York. Join our practice, in person or online, at endlesspathzendo.org.
So today is Saturday, April 4th, 2026, because April 8th is the traditional date on the Mahayana calendar of the Buddha's birth. We have now a one-day Zazen Kai in honor of the Buddha, and the teisho this morning will be on the Buddha's birth. Often the story of the Buddha's birth is presented or used for Vesak ceremonies, especially in North America, which tends to be a festival, which really involves lots of children's activities, children, birth. It's kind of all, connected, and we tend to link these things up. But actually, the story of the Buddha's birth is a profound teaching, one difference in our little Zendo is we don't have lots of children connected with the Zendo. Most people's children are grown up, and the one child of Malcolm and Olivia is just over a month old, so he's not really going to be that concerned about our story at this point. So we have an interesting opportunity to look into the depth of the story, the myth, the legend, and what it's really saying in relation to practice, without being diverted into other areas of it, which it has tremendous use for, but we get to approach it in a little different way. So the legend is quite charming, and it goes like this, a version of it. And this is essentially the traditional narrative. In the city of Kapilavastu in southern Nepal, Queen Maya, wife of King Suddhodana of the Shakya clan, had a marvelous dream. In her dream, a six-tusked white elephant touched her right side with a lotus flower. She awoke in joy and told the king. The king's advisors said that the dream meant that a child would soon be born to them. Further, if the child could be kept from the painful facts of impermanence, he would rise to the position of world ruler. But if he grasped the reality of impermanence, he would renounce worldly life, he would renounce wealth and kingship, he would leave home and become, after dedicating himself to years of practice, a fully awakened Buddha. The king was both overjoyed and troubled. He'd long wanted an heir, a son who'd not just be his equal, but would surpass him and become emperor of the world, fulfilled his own greatest dreams. Not unusual thing for a parent to want the child to fulfill their own dreams. Many of us have got to work our way through that. So it goes. But the king was determined to protect his gifted child from all signs of impermanence so that the boy would grow up to surpass him as a world ruler. We might say, good luck. It's like fighting the sea, isn't it? How are you going to do that? Keep the child from all signs of impermanence, really. Anyway, near the end of the queen's pregnancy, she set out for the home of her parents to give birth there, a tradition of the time. On the way, her retinue stopped at the Lumbini Gardens. There, while standing beneath an ancient sala tree, and as a rain of blossoms fell upon her, she gave birth. This, of course, is the legend. Legend holds that at that moment as well, the air filled with the scent of incense, and beautiful voices began to sing in a language of delight. Emerging painlessly from his mother's right side, the baby Buddha took 7 steps, lotus flowers springing up, opening beneath his feet. Devas, that is, beings of the higher realms, Buddhism doesn't deny other realms and their possibilities, but of course they're unenlightened realms, and so even the Devas recognize the worth of human birth. Even the gods recognize the worth of human birth in Buddhist tradition, because it's from the human position, human birth, human life, that true understanding, enlightenment, becomes much more possible. In fact, the very impermanence of things drives us to want to understand more deeply, and eventually this leads to a yearning for true understanding and a way of living from a greater depth. So, emerging painlessly from his mother's right side, the baby Buddha took 7 steps, lotus flowers opening beneath his feet. Devas descending from higher realms poured heavenly ambrosia over him. The legendary words of the baby Buddha, washing all birth impurities away, raising one hand toward the heavens and pointing the other down toward the earth, he sounded the lion's roar. This is the proclamation of a Buddha. It stuns all lesser voices with its truth. That's this essence of the lion's roar, the most noble and powerful sound known in the ancient world. When we come to do our ceremony, you'll see we have a figure of the baby Buddha standing with one hand raised, pointing up to the heavens, and one hand pointing down to the earth. And he sounds the lion's roar, proclaiming, above the heavens, below the heavens, I alone, the honored one, in this life I shall be a Buddha. All suffering beings experienced freedom, joy, and peace. Prisoners, captives, and exiles found release. Hellfires ceased to burn. Hungry ghosts were satisfied. Animals were freed of fear. Warring spirits stopped battling one another. Happiness momentarily suffused all beings, all realms. However, no one was happier than Queen Maya seeing her own long-awaited child at last, unless it was the newborn Buddha-to-be himself, who already looked upon each deva, person, animal, tree, hungry ghost, battling spirit, hell-dweller, flower, and stone with the eye of a mother who regards her beloved and only child. Tremendous love rising out of complete selflessness, above the heavens, below the heavens. I alone, the honored one. It could be, we'll get into this, a statement of supreme egotism, but it's quite the contrary. So, this is the essence of the Buddhist tradition's legend of the Buddha's birth, which uses the language of myth to point beyond the literal. The birth of any child is totally ordinary and at the same time a miracle. How do 2 cells become a living person? How do gastrula and blastula become a being, a specific being, with talents, interests, features, and personality? Where does a child come from? The birth of any one child is a mystery that affects us all, whether we consciously know it or not. Myth gives imaginative space to the uncanny, ordinary reality we are actually living every day. Still, babies don't talk, and they don't take steps. The baby Buddha's profound utterances can't be taken literally. Fundamentalism's reductive literalization of myth takes us down a rigid road. So far, no Buddhist sects have sprung up arguing over what the baby Buddha said or how many steps he actually took. Of course, that's always a possibility given the reductive abilities of the human mind. So we have to watch out for that. It turns religion into dogma, and dogma becomes a prison, and prisons lead to entanglements and sufferings of all sorts. Let's hope, again, that Buddhist tradition never goes down that road. Yet we humans have been sadly all too willing to cling to beloved untruths and make mountains of not even molehills, but anthills. It's quite a talent we have to turn anthills into mountains that block our way. We're so good at creating our own obstacles. I mean, it's a talent. We had to have worked so hard at it for so long. So it makes it very hard to let go of. We're so committed to it. Thinking of childish stories. If you think the legend of the Buddha's birth is a children's story, look again. Look at the news. It's a children's story turning into a nightmare. Unbelievable. In any case, Zen begins with the sense that our current story might at least be, if not true, then inadequate. We have a suspicion, wait a minute, something doesn't make sense here. What could it be? And that's our opening. Something doesn't make sense in the story we're currently living. Something doesn't make sense in the story that human beings are presenting as if it's true. That was one of the great draws of, in my youth, becoming a literary critic. Critic didn't mean judging things and saying this is good or this is bad. Literary criticism really meant understanding the patterns so you could speak intelligently about what was happening in a story. But it also helped you apply those same skills to the story of our culture, the story of our life, and say, wait a minute, something really, what's that line from Hamlet? Something's rotten in the state of Denmark. You began to see that the whole story had something rotten going on. So reading stories, reading fiction can be a great path towards gaining a sense of what the patterns are. Roshi Kapleau used to say that to practice Zen, there's not much we need to believe, except that 2,500 years ago, the Buddha was neither a fool nor a liar when upon his great enlightenment he spontaneously exclaimed, "Wonder of wonders, all beings are Buddha, fully endowed with wisdom and virtue. Only their self-oriented, delusive thinking prevents them from realizing it. It prevents us from realizing it because it's an unconscious habit. It's like not seeing your own bones when you are walking on your bones all the time. They give us form. It's like that central illusion or delusions that make us think this is the way things are. But the Buddha said, wonder of wonders, all beings are Buddhas, fully endowed, each one with wisdom and virtue, all the wisdom and virtue in the entire cosmos. Only the habit of unconscious, self-oriented, dualistic thinking, me in here, you out there, prevents us from actually knowing this, knowing it in our bones, not just as a couple of lines in a book. We don't need to literally believe that the Buddha spoke as a newborn, or that flowers rained down from the skies, or that he took 7 steps. However, is there truth in these mythic elements nonetheless? Definitely. Definitely. They take the mind beyond the literal into the great mystery of what birth in a child is. And while Zen practice offers us the opportunity to mature beyond unconscious beliefs and realize original nature or unconditioned mind for ourselves just as we are, the way of the bodhisattva or wisdom being or growing up being, bodhisattva simply means wisdom being, that's a person who's growing up beyond their conditioned self-centeredness, sense of dualistic isolation, must still begin with belief, with some basic faith that there is something beyond, yet not separate from the senses and intellect that can be realized, that can be awoken to, not conceptualized as another idea, but awoken to completely beyond all ideas, before ideas even begin. Yeats has that line, I must lie down again, where all the ladders start. One of his last poems, Circus Animals' Desertion, I must lie down again, where all the ladders start in the foul rag and bone shop of the heart. Before you even start thinking, before you put up all that junk that you carry around, it's already there, where the ladder's standing is what the ladder's standing on. In any case, not separate from the senses and intellect that can be realized. And with the understanding as well that it'll take work to wake to it. And that's the paradox, isn't it? If we're all Buddhas, all filled with wisdom and virtue from the very beginning, then how come I don't know it? How come I act so often like an idiot? How come it's going to take work? It's not just going to be handed to me to know it. How come if I am it? That's a problem. I have to work at it. I have to put time into it. I have to sacrifice the things that I thought were really important to do it. Gosh, what's going on? That's a good place to start. What's going on? How come it's like that? However, while this sounds relatively simple, hey, we're all Buddhas. All we have to do is realize it. Doesn't it sound simple? Doesn't it give you some faint hope that you could do this? Typically, it does not come easily. Fairy tales remind us that we may have to eat 7 iron loaves and wear out 7 pairs of iron shoes before we arrive at fulfillment. And this is not simply advice for children. Persistence is the essence of the hero and heroine's journey. Persistence in Zen practice embodies our faith that the Buddha wasn't a fool or a liar when he spoke of our birthright of original, unconditioned, selfless, knowing, completely love with no other mind, unconditioned mind. What is our connection to the universe? Above the heavens, below the heavens, I alone, the honored one. What do the words mean spoken by the baby Buddha? Anyway, persistence in Zen embodies the faith our faith, that the Buddha wasn't a fool or a liar when he spoke of our birthright of unconditioned mind, knowing mind, wise mind, compassionate mind, virtuous mind, how deeply that gets buried. Can we dig it out? He wasn't talking about something unique to Buddhists either. He was telling us there is something worth realizing at the very core of this life, the life we're living, and that while we may each have caught glimpses of it now and then in childhood, perhaps you have a memory of feeling so completely connected with things. There were no words for it, or maybe you've had that experience as an adult at some point, spontaneously, something that was wonderful, but you couldn't place it in any category, maybe. Formal Zen practice can make such initial glimpses, or even deep experiences, more consistent, more fundamental, something we can live from, not just look back on with some degree of joy and mystery. The legendary words of the baby Buddha, above the heavens, below the heavens, I alone, the honored one, or I alone, the only one, can be badly misunderstood. They do not present egotism or narcissism, but just the opposite, humility and selflessness. A note to the classic Zen text of the Blue Cliff Record, or Hekigan-roku, says, an ancient said, a sage has no self, but there is nothing that is not his or her self. A sage has no self, but there is nothing that is not his or her self. Through the baby Buddha's legendary words, original enlightenment is given voice. Above the heavens, below the heavens, I alone, the honored one. No other, no self. What is this direct seeing, this direct experiencing? We approach this in our practice with such fundamental inquiries as who's hearing? Who sees color with the eyes? Who hears sounds with the ears? Who thinks thoughts with the brain? Who remembers memories? Aiken Roshi told me when I was working on that practice, if you want to understand Buddhism, the essence of the Buddha way, the essence of Zen Master Dogen's teaching lies in this question: who is hearing? Basui's letters and Sermon on One Mind, which is a great section of the Three Pillars of Zen, goes right to this. He consistently questioned himself: who is the master? Who is hearing? Who's seeing? Who's moving about? Remember in Layman Pong's Beautiful Snowflakes, which we spoke about last week, the question that he brought to his teachers, Shido and Matsu, was who is it that does not accompany the 10,000 things? Who is it? Who is it that does not accompany the 10,000 things? What's he getting at with that question other than who am I? 10,000 things are pencils, paper clips, light bulbs, cars, cats, dogs, peoples, dust, snowflakes, leaves, raindrops. Who is it that does not accompany the 10,000 things? So, while legend asserts that the Buddha knew this truth at birth, history reminds us that that baby still had to grow up and become Prince Siddhartha Gautama, who, heartsick over his own first-hand experience of old age, sickness, and death, had then to struggle to really, finally, fully and consciously realize what he'd already understood at birth. Are we different? There's a Jewish legend that says that every child in the womb already knows all truth, all wisdom. But at birth, an angel touches the child's upper lip with its finger, leaving that indentation beneath the nose. That's the proof. If you doubt it, that's the proof. And the child forgets it all. And then our life's work from that instant on is the work of overcoming that angelic touch and remembering what we once already fully knew. Our life is the work of making this innate wisdom conscious and mature. But it was already there from the start. We just forgot. Remember Ikkyu's wonderful little verse, when I tried to remember, I always forgot. But once I forgot, I never forget. When I tried to remember, when I tried to remember, I always forgot. But once I forgot, that is, forgot myself completely. I never forget. Everything that I was looking for is already here. Zen Master Ikkyu wrote, that was the next paragraph. How about that? When I tried to remember, I always forgot. Once I forgot, I never forget. This is right recollection in a nutshell. With the self, preoccupied self forgotten, what we've been seeking is already here. We don't have to add a thing. With self-centeredness dropped away, we are home. We're home. What we've been looking for is already here. This very place is the pure lotus land, as the Zazen Wasan, Hakuin song in praise of Zazen says. This very body, the body of Buddha. This aging, screwed up, ailing body is the body of Buddha. What are you, crazy? And yet, if he wasn't a fool or a liar, what was he talking about? Don't we want to know? With self-centeredness dropped away, we are home. This is a great relief. The last lines of The Lord of the Rings touch us deeply because they remind us of something we all know, something universal. I'm a great believer in literature. I think literature gives us the patterns of our own yearning for true homecoming, true understanding. I think the structure of narrative, of story itself, shows us this in every period we're aware of story and narrative. Anyway, at the end of The Lord of the Rings, Sam returns from seeing Frodo and Gandalf off at the Grey Havens, and Tolkien writes, and he went on, and there was a yellow light and a fire within, and the evening meal was ready, and he was expected, and Rose drew him in and set him in his chair and put little Eleanor upon his lap. He drew a breath. Well, I'm back, he said. That's the end of The Lord of the Rings. Well, I'm back. Doesn't that just give you a chill right up your spine? To really be back? To really be home? My God, the tears that we've all shed. Just to really, even for a moment, to really be home on this planet, in this place, in this very life, just as we each are. Not when you're something special, not when you're fully enlightened, not when you're a Buddha. That wasn't the Buddha's message. It was right now. All beings are Buddha. We just don't know it. And because we don't, think of the terrible, terrible things littering history that human beings have done, being cut off from that real experience of being at home, right where we are. The point of the journey is not to end up in some esoteric place, but to come fully home. This is what literature is telling us again and again. Certainly epics do, certainly fairy tales and mythic stories do. But how do we do it? How do we get home? Zen practice says by attending to counting this breath from 1 to 10. By becoming fully aware of the exhale all the way out. By sitting completely absorbed in the koan, in the question who's hearing, or in thinking, not thinking, which is another way of saying shikantaza, just sitting. In short, by practicing is how the self is forgotten. And we find out we're home with the self forgotten, not gotten rid of, not pushed away, not repressed. That doesn't do it at all. That only makes things worse. It's self-forgotten. When I tried to remember, I always forgot. But once I forgot, I never forget. And as we do, the world of the 10,000 unique and individual things steps in, and it is as if we are born anew. And this is how a Buddha is born. That's what the myth is really about. It's not necessarily about history. It's how a Buddha is born right now. Yet the Buddha's historic, legendary birth is a mystery, and presenting it as miraculous offers its own legitimate truth. Where does a person who is the first to do what's never been done, someone whose efforts ultimately influence millions of lives for the good, come from? By the way, I should have said this from the start. I'm reading from an older book of mine from the last, it was a couple of years ago, not that old, A Zen Life of Buddha, published by Sumeru Books. So this is one of the early chapters on Buddha's birth. Buddhist tradition says that the birth of the child, Siddhartha Gautama, was the first time in our world cycle, and Buddhism holds that there have been other world cycles on this planet, and certainly a little bit of geology that I know indicates that the top of Mount Everest was once the bottom of the sea, and the oceans may have been the tops of mountains. The bottoms of the oceans may have been the tops of mountains. In other words, there have been world cycles. Who knows what went on as the world, the way the old, what was that soap opera said, as the world turned. Yes. So, where does such a person come from? So, it said that Siddhartha Gautama was the first time in our world cycle that original realization found its voice. Buddhist tradition holds that there were past Buddhas on earth before him, and that there will be future Buddhas, that is, fully awakened human beings, fully able to make use of our complete potential for wisdom and compassion, that there have been people who've opened that up in previous world cycles, and there will be future people who do the same. This is the whole purpose, and we might say, of the universe, is to become fully conscious of its potential. And each one of us has the seed, the potential to do that. And we just have to keep working on it, is the Buddhist position, as far as I understand. The baby Buddha, after proclaiming his selfless truth, lapsed back into infantile smiles, tears, gurgles, laughs, and coos. And probably when he got to be 2 years old, he started throwing food on the floor. He was doing it all. He was a baby. When grown as Prince Siddhartha, after seeing signs of impermanence, which his father was not able to keep from him, he gave up his throne and set off into the wilderness of forest and mountains to fulfill his deeper calling as a human being, to know who or what he really is or was. Something that sickness, aging, death couldn't fully touch, actually. Maybe couldn't touch at all. In his complete enlightenment, all potential powers of the mind for wisdom and compassion were, tradition holds, opened and fulfilled. Amazingly, and if you've ever practiced Zen at all, you know you begin to realize how amazing this is. He did this entirely on his own. Well, he did have several teachers at the start, but they recognized immediately that he knew as much as they did, actually, or very quickly he came to understand as much as they did. So he felt they just did not go far enough, and he rather quickly moved on. People try to maybe think they can imitate this. I'll do this on my own, and I would only say good luck. If you've ever practiced Zen or been to Sesshin, you know how much guidance we each need, how many mistakes we each can make, and that we're only able to do this because we've had the guidance of others who've come before us, who've gone through at least the degree of training that we call giving Dharma transmission to. That is, you understand the same as your teacher who's been through their own training. But even this is just a very faint beginning when we're looking at the talking about a fully realized Buddha. We're just all beginners, really. But he did the whole thing on his own. This is almost impossible to grasp when you realize how much help and support we've each needed to gain whatever tiny degree of understanding we may have. His ongoing effort arose out of a determination to benefit all beings. He started with that aspiration right from the start. It arose out of the conviction that there was something more, something beyond the senses and intellect, yet not separate from them. It arose out of a dedication to the reality, not just the possibility of awakening. It arose out of dismay and disillusionment, and out of grievous pain caused by errors and failures, his own errors and failures. And it arose out of lifetimes of practice as dramatized in the Jataka tales, which is why I really love the Jataka tales, because they show the Buddha in all kinds of conditions of life, working at it, that it didn't come easily even to him. What we see as this guy suddenly becoming a full Buddha came after lifetimes of the kind of work we're each doing now to try and be a more complete human being, to try and be a better person, to try and be more present in this life, to try and touch base with a degree of realization as a foundation of being a truly human being. In any case, knowing from our own practice how hard it is to catch even a glimpse of realization, Prince Siddhartha's ability to accomplish the path alone is not simply extraordinary, it is miraculous. His birth is cause for celebration. A tremendous amount of hard work was still needed before what was already in place for him was finally fully mature. Yet the essence was already there, fully established with above the heavens, below the heavens. This, above the heavens, below the heavens, is not simply some Eastern thing. Let's be clear. The 17th century English Christian theologian and mystic, Thomas Traherne, speaking of his own childhood in his Centuries of Meditations, 3rd century, which was a book unknown, interesting like Dogen Shobogenzo, totally unknown for several hundred years. And in a handwritten manuscript by Thomas Traherne, who was in the 17th century, was found in a bookseller's stall in London, in the piles of disregarded materials. And they discovered Thomas Traherne, who was totally unknown in his own time. So here's what he wrote. I've read this before, and I'm always just blown away by what he wrote in the 17th century. The corn was orient and immortal wheat, which never should be reaped, nor was ever sown. I thought it had stood from everlasting to everlasting. The dust and stones of the street were as precious as gold. The gates were at first the end of the world. The green trees, when I saw them first through one of the gates, transported and ravished me. Their sweetness and unusual beauty made my heart to leap, and almost mad with ecstasy. They were such strange and wonderful things. The men, oh, what venerable and reverent creatures did the aged seem, immortal cherubim, and young men, glittering and sparkling angels, and maids, strange seraphic pieces of life and beauty. Boys and girls tumbling in the streets and playing were moving jewels. I knew not that they were born or should die, but all things abided eternally as they were in their proper places. Eternity was manifest in the light of the day, and something infinite behind everything appeared, which talked with my expectation and moved my desire. The city seemed to stand in Eden, or to be built in heaven. The streets were mine. The temple was mine. The people were mine. Their clothes and gold and silver were mine, as much as their sparkling eyes, fair skins, and ruddy faces. Skies were mine, and so were the sun and moon and stars, and all the world was mine, and I, the only spectator and enjoyer of it. I knew no churlish properties, nor bounds, nor divisions, but all properties and divisions were mine, all treasures, and the possessors of them. So that with much ado, I was corrupted and made to learn the dirty devices of this world, which now I unlearn and become, as it were, a little child again. Above the heavens, below the heavens, I alone, the honored one. This is not something trapped in Buddhism that you have to be a Buddhist to get. This is our birthright. This is our potential to wake to this. Traherne had such a clear memory of that experience as a child, of living that he worked in the end to unlearn everything that he'd been conditioned to and become, as it were, a child again. Thomas Traherne, Centuries, Poems, and Thanksgivings, Volume 1, Introduction and Centuries is what that's from. Of course, the little teeny bit I know of Christianity, as far as I know, Jesus said something like that. He must become as a child again to enter the gates of heaven. The historic Buddha's birth led to a practice by which we can confirm the reality of these stunning words. So each year, on or around April 8th, we take a little time out of our busy schedules to honor the birth of the Buddha. And as Zen Buddhists, the way we do that is by sitting. Not like frogs, just sitting there, but working on ourselves. Who's hearing? What is mu? One. Two. Becoming fully the practice. We're grateful for the possibilities the Buddha's efforts opened to us. But before we're lost in sentimentality, there's this from Master Yunmen. Here's the quote. Yunmen related the legend that the Buddha immediately after his birth, Yunmen was quite a character, Unmon in Japanese. So he tells the legend of the Buddha's birth, which I just related to you, to his community. And he talks about immediately after his birth, the baby Buddha holds one hand up to heaven, the other down to earth, walked around 7 steps, looked at the 4 quarters, and declared, above the heaven, below the heavens, I alone am the honored one. And then, after telling this beautiful story, Yunmen said, if I were witness of this scene, I would have knocked him to death at a single stroke and given his flesh to dogs for food. This would have been some contribution to the peace and harmony of the world. That's from John Woo's The Golden Age of Zen, a book which, if you've not read it, I certainly do recommend. Roshi Kapleau just loved this quote, which reminds us that we don't need fantastic legends and images, wonderful as they truly are, for they too can bind us and trip us up. People can get really hung up on it, is what Yunmen was saying. Oh, let's talk about miracles. Yunmen says, ditch that. Cut that to pieces. Take a good look for yourself. But when we throw them away, we find that the Buddha was simply a person who, deeply troubled by impermanence and deeply aspiring to be of benefit to all, put his life on the line to realize truth and open a path to it for others to follow. Yunmen, 1,500 years after the Buddha and 1,000 years before us, wanted us to be like the Buddha and awake, not remain trapped by signs and wonders. While myth suggests vast realities, the word myth itself has been popularly degraded to mean untruth, perhaps due to a half-baked understanding that myth is not literal. Of course it's not, but that doesn't mean it's false. That would be a failure to understand that, regarded properly, myth leads us to the very door that Zen practice flings wide open, even as it speaks back to us from the other side of that gateless gate. All our Dharma ancestors, men and women who, troubled by impermanence and injustice, had faith that there was something more, encourage us to keep going. The way extends so endlessly that even Shakyamuni, the fully realized Buddha himself, is, according to Buddhist tradition, only halfway there. Yasutani Roshi presents the core of this rather dramatically and literally in the 3 pillars of Zen, stating that we fancy ourselves to be the crown of creation, yet from a Buddhist perspective, we're only halfway between an amoeba and a fully awakened Buddha. That's where human beings stand. Halfway with our current level of consciousness. We're halfway between an amoeba and a fully awakened Buddha. Sobering words. Anyone who thinks they've gotten it and have gone far enough may want to reconsider. Yunmen's response was his unique way of honoring the Buddha, not denigrating the Buddha. His way of making sure that we would honor the Buddha with actual, ongoing practice realization, not mere idolatry or belief. His words are an antidote to fundamentalism. Yet, to imitate Yunmen's iconoclastic Zen will itself lead us astray, using harsh words, shouts and blows, because Yunmen and others did it, is not Zen, but only imitative wild fox slobber, a kind of self-indulgent poison. In our Buddha's birth ceremony, which takes place on or near April 8th, its traditional date on the Mahayana Buddhist calendar, we honor the Buddha tenderly and traditionally with respect for the mythic import of his legend. Raising a spoon of sweet tea, we pour it over our baby Buddha, anointing and cleansing him just like those birth-attending gods, those devas, did 2,500 years ago. And it has another purpose as well. In washing the baby Buddha free of grime, we wash our own minds free of greed, anger, and ignorance. This, too, is how a Buddha gets born. In 2016, Rose and I joined Sunyana Graf Roshi and her students of the Vermont Zen Center and Casa Zen, Costa Rica, and Taiken Henderson Roshi, and members of the Toronto Zen Center on a pilgrimage to Japan. While there, we visited Ensuji, the training temple of the poet and Zen priest who I love, Ryokan. His date 758 to 1831, where we found a baby Buddha on the altar with one hand raised to the heavens and one pointed down to the earth. Though in Japan on that pilgrimage we saw Buddhas as big as houses, glorious and golden, at Ryokan's little temple, or Ensuji, it wasn't so little, but modest training place, the baby Buddha was about the same size as our little wooden one here at Endless Path Zendo, which you'll see when we turn the laptop around, if you're coming by Zoom, which is maybe 6 or 8 inches high, and it was even less impressive than ours. Theirs was cast in dull black metal. It was humble and quite touching to see, and yet it stands out to me as one of the highlights of our pilgrimage. Practicing realization, that's how a Buddha is born. The story of the Buddha's birth might be based on history or not. Regardless, it remains a solid metaphor for our own potential. This very count, this very breath, this very koan can be our own entrance into the Lumbini Gardens, which in reality is the whole green living earth. To unpack the mythic language a bit further, we might say that whenever self-centered, delusive thinking falls away and a person awakes to the selfless reality of above the heavens, below the heavens, a Buddha is born. The sweet little figures of the baby Buddha then are not simply sentimental mementos capable of rousing tender devotion. They are also offering a highly concentrated image of actual practice realization. With awakening, a Buddha is born. In addition to pointing back into legend and history, they simultaneously touch base with the full potential of this very moment. Baby Buddhas, awake, rejoice. We'll stop here. We'll recite together our great vows for all, and I will turn off the recording and turn the laptop around so we can all see the altar with the baby Buddha in front of it.